and welcome. I'm Asuma Kataoka and you are watching Focal Length, your gateway to deep-rooted analysis of key global issues. Tonight we will shed light on the most vulnerable part of the world, Gaza. From security guarantees to Gaza's hospitals, today we will discuss how the international community can bring a peace deal close as fuel and water run out in the war-hit zone. We will further discuss whether international pressure can halt further escalation of war between Israel and Hamas. We will also explore the impact of ICC warrants, the deadlock over a ceasefire, the devastation of Gaza's education system, and whether Israeli domestic pressure on Netanyahu could shift the path forward towards a negotiated peace. To discuss this, we sit down today with Dr. Dalal Iriqat. She's an associate professor of diplomacy at the Arab American University in Palestine, a strategic policy advisor, and a leading voice in soft power, state building, and peace diplomacy. Dr. Iriqat brings years of expertise in diplomacy, strategic communications, and conflict resolution to help us understand what comes next for Palestine and for the region. With the UN now estimating that about 85% of Gaza is either under evacuation orders or active combat, what minimum security guarantees are needed for aid teams to reach families still trapped inside these no-go zones?
Well, the first demand should be now, after 20 months of a documented genocide, is ceasefire. It's ceasefire in Gaza, ceasefire in the West Bank. Around 2 million Palestinian civilians are suffering under the Israeli fire and are under famine, and they are deprived from the basic human rights. They don't have water, they don't have medicine, they don't have food. They are starving, basically, as everybody is watching. So the bare minimum today is ceasefire, for the hostages to be released, for the Palestinian civilians to actually practice the normal, basic, minimum human rights of water and food and medicine. So what cannot be tolerated any longer after 21 months of genocide is that Israel continues with its war crimes, with its apartheid, with its racist policies, with its violations of international humanitarian law, with its violations of UN system, while nobody is holding Israel accountable. As long as Netanyahu and his right-wing government are enjoying this impunity, I really wonder what would stop those atrocities, what would stop this genocide, what would make the right of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza sound as if it should be taken for granted, that this is a human right at the end of the day. And those people in Gaza who are suffering are basically civilians who have nothing to do with Hamas or have nothing to do with armed resistance. Those are suffering. This is collective punishment. And by international law, this also amounts to war crimes by Israel. Israel must stop its atrocities. Netanyahu and his government must stop their genocide, because the Palestinian people are facing war crimes that are being documented at the ICJ in 2025, and this should not be tolerated any longer.
And building on that, Gaza's hospitals warn they will shut down within days as fuel runs out and water systems collapse. What should be the first 3 priorities for an emergency international air or sea lift to keep basic healthcare alive?
Listen, in Gaza is a 365 square kilometers. The whole area is totally devastated. Everything is totally destroyed. Everything was, bulldozed or shelled from the skies. So there is even the remaining hospitals, there are parts of the remaining hospitals where you will see some rooms or some departments or some, medical sections with no ceilings, with no pipelines, with no tools, with no anesthesian, or medical tools. So they are trying to provide for the civilian patients their maximum effort from a humanitarian perspective, but they really don't have the capacities. Israel had destroyed everything. Israel had made sure to target all the hospitals, all the mosques, all the services, all the schools, the universities, the infrastructure. They were not only targeting the human beings with 70% focus on women and children, but also they did not leave any room for humanity to survive in Gaza, while those people, the 2 million Palestinians should enjoy the right to self-determination, the basic human rights, to live in dignity, to have the minimum human rights of the basic supplies, water, medicine, and food. We should not be negotiating on humanitarian aid. In international relations and conflict resolution, the norm is that humanitarian aid and food should not be really negotiated. Negotiations should go over the disputed stuff and details of borders, of other really very sensitive issues, but not the human needs in the 21st century. Human needs should not be contested. Human needs should not be put on negotiations. Everybody should be holding Israel accountable for its violations of international law today. What the Gaza people had been enduring is just difficult. It's impossible for any conscious mind to process. It should not be tolerated. It's a violation of international humanitarian law, a violation of the UN resolutions, a violation of being a human in the 21st century. So what should be done now? The Trump administration needs to act, but also the international community and all the member states who enjoy bilateral relations with Israel from a diplomatic perspective should also put sanctions on Israel right now, should also practice coercive diplomacy on Israel right now, because Israel cannot continue with its, war crimes, atrocities, and collective punishment against the Palestinian people, while the world is still begging Netanyahu and his cabinet, who are basically a bunch of criminals now labeled by the ICC. The ICC had issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and other policymakers in Israel. Those policymakers in Israel are now labeled under international law and this world order as criminals. So what we are witnessing today in the relationship between Israel and the world is something that nobody had imagined to see in the international relations of politics, of the political system, anchored in political science or international relations or foreign policy or diplomacy, to say the least. What we are witnessing by Netanyahu and his policymakers is just the mindset of criminals and not really policymakers, and this should not be tolerated.
Now, looking at the recent shootings after the 12th July shooting that has killed 17 people lining up for food in Rafah, one of dozens of deadly incidents at 8 points. What independent monitoring or protection mechanisms must be in place before any safe passage scheme can be credible?
Listen, there's 2 points to make here. First of all, when there is not enough aid coming in, and the mechanism that is the aid is being distributed with is totally wrong, because people are also dying while they are suffocating in those very tiny spaces as they are collecting the aid, and they are being targeted immediately by the Israeli authorities. So the guarantees, it should not take a genius to put international guarantees. UN system, peacekeeping missions. I came up with a bunch of Palestinian academics and analysts, and we just published an armistice plan under the Cambridge Institute for Peace. It is now available publicly. I can provide you with the plan. We are offering a Palestinian perspective for peace, for the day after, for governance, for humanitarian aid, and we actually lay out all the details where the Palestinians have responsibilities, the Israelis have responsibilities, and the international community also has responsibilities. However, the one thing that we should all agree on today, that ceasefire must be common sense now, because what the civilians of Gaza are enduring and are suffering should not continue.
Israel's security cabinet has secretly approved 22 new West Bank outposts. What levers, if any, remain under international law or bilateral pressure to hold further land grabs, according to you?
Listen, let's be very clear. I live in the West Bank, okay? If you come and if you travel from the south city of Hebron or Beit Lahem, and you drive to the north until Jenin or Nablus or Tulkarem or Kalkilia, passing by Ramallah, you will witness with your own eyes that the settlements project, the settler colonial project, did not leave any room for the Palestinian state. So this is, again, this is something that we also need to consider as we're talking about the two-state solution, the International Coalition for Peace, the international conference that will be held lately this month in New York, the Saudi and French-led initiative. With all the respect and appreciation to the diplomatic efforts, in reality, Israel is imposing a settler colonial project. Israel is actually practicing annexation on the ground. So it doesn't really need a legal approval of the international community. On the ground, land grab is taking place, annexation is taking place, settler colonialism did not stop for one day. And Israel is still putting the excuse and justifying all those atrocities and annexation and racist policies and settler attacks, settler terrorism, and the settler colonial project that actually, diminishes any hope for peace in this region. It actually destroys and kills any prospects for peace or the Palestinian state, or actually, it actually denies, and they don't try, the Israeli policymakers, to say that they say no to peace, they say no to the Palestinian state, and they say no to the Palestinian right to self-determination. They say yes to annexation, they say yes to the settlements, they say yes to land grabs, they say yes to confiscations of lands, they say yes to targeting the Palestinian civilians. Just this morning, the Israeli settlers had attacked Ain Samia, which is a water spring. And those settlers are armed, and they are backed by the Israeli authorities and the Israeli soldiers who actually provide them with protection. So what we are witnessing is a settler colonial project that continues to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, to forcibly displace the Palestinians, or suffocate the Palestinians and put them on no other choices but to leave, while they are on daily basis confiscating the land, annexing and grabbing more and more land for the best interest of the project of Greater Israel that Netanyahu did not shy to show the maps of in New York at the UN General Assembly in September 2023, when he put that map from, with the expanded borders of Israel, which doesn't only grab the Palestinian land of the 67 borderline, but it also invades the sovereign territorial lands of Syria, of Lebanon, of Jordan, of Egypt. So his project is really way bigger than we think. The settler colonial project actually is a threat, not only to the Palestinian rights, but also to the all regional and Arab states.
The ICC warns for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant mark an unprecedented move. Could this alter Israeli military calculations in Gaza or open new diplomatic space for Palestinians?
Well, I believe in diplomatic tools and I believe in international law. We as Palestinians have respected international law and diplomacy for a long time. It's been more than 4 decades that we're talking about negotiations, reconciliation, mediation, peace process. We have given up 78% of historic Palestine for the sake of peace with the Israelis. Yet on the ground, what we witness is more entrenched Israeli military occupation, more confiscations of lands, more settler terrorism, more detentions, more extrajudicial killings, more deprivation of the basic rights on a daily basis. So with all the respect and importance of the international and legal developments on the ICC level and the ICJ level, however, the dilemma remains with the question that the international law is at crisis nowadays. International law and the international world rules order is at crisis and is under question, because in principle and in theory, everything is clear and everything is correct. They are criminals. There are arrest warrants that are issued against them. The ICJ had opened a case for genocidal war by Israel against the Palestinian people. Yet when it comes to practice, there comes the complicity, or there comes, the hesitation of where we face the dilemma between theory and practice. How do we enforce those resolutions? How do we enforce those mechanisms? How do we enforce the court's decisions? And here lies the dilemma of, the power politics of, if we're talking about diplomacy, international law that prevails, human rights that prevails, the principles, world order, or really the powerful countries like the US and like-minded countries who are supporting a state-organized terror that is committing a genocide in 2025.
ceasefire talks in Doha are deadlocked over the scale of an IDF withdrawal. From a Palestinian negotiating standpoint, what are the non-negotiable core parameters for a truly permanent truce?
I honestly don't think that what is happening now is serious negotiations, to be very honest. The Trump administration had been ballooning and had been, issuing PR statements that a ceasefire or a truce will be reached soon, and it raised the Palestinians' morals and aspirations and hopes. Yet, after 22 months of genocide, nothing is happening. Nothing is happening on the ground while the Israeli authorities continue to raid and shell every second. Every day in Gaza, we have more than 100 martyrs. In the West Bank also, we have martyrs, we have invasions, we have settlers attacks. So the bare minimum is immediate ceasefire and for the Israeli withdrawal and to engage on a sustained, serious negotiation process. Because what's happening today really seems like they want to impose new facts on the ground and not really to negotiate. When Israel comes bluntly and say that they don't want to withdraw from Gaza and that they want to maintain control on Gaza, they're basically saying that they are occupying Gaza and that they don't want to grant the Palestinians any right to governance, any right to administer Gaza, any right to self-determination. So they are basically talking about, imposing, declaring, legalizing, de jure, the Israeli military occupation in Gaza and the West Bank. This should not be tolerated. It is common sense in diplomacy. When war ends, they should end on negotiating tables. But what Trump is insinuating by his deals and by his talks about a prosperous Middle East and about winning the Nobel Prize for Peace is really, when we look at the textbooks of political science, diplomacy, and conflict resolution, they are not applying theory into practice. They are just putting some, commercial trade deals, business deals at the table where the interests prevail over principles and human rights and international law. And this should not be accepted. This should not be tolerated. International law and justice must prevail. And, diplomacy and sanity and respect and adherence to the UN resolutions and the international world order and the international courts is a must. It's an obligation. It's a legal and moral obligation on every member state that enjoy bilateral relations with Israel to start by putting sanctions on Israel, by stopping the atrocities and the madness of the Israeli policymakers who continue to commit war crimes against the Palestinian civilians.
Scholars use the term ecocide as more than 80% of Gaza's schools and all 12 universities lie in ruins. What are the long-term societal costs when an entire generation loses access to formal education?
Well, we need to focus on the fact that those are basic human needs and rights. When we talk about education, supplies, the buildings, the institutions, the human resources. What Israel is doing is basically targeting all this infrastructure, and they had focused on destroying the schools, the nurseries, the universities, the labs, the hospitals, the training, labs, because they want to, by definition, commit a genocide. It is basically the basic definition of a genocide under international law is the destruction of this human, infrastructure, or what would make humans survive in a certain piece of land. So Israel, by targeting the schools and the universities and the hospitals, made sure not to leave any room for the Palestinian right to self-determination. They want to suffocate the Palestinians, to totally deprive them from those basic rights, to force them to leave. However, after 21 months of this genocide, the Palestinian people had proved that they want to continue to live in Palestine and that they will not give up their rights. What it would take, we need a ceasefire, and then we need international peacekeeping missions, and then we need protection mechanisms for the Palestinians, and then we should run a serious assessment on the ground. We cannot just assess and evaluate what is needed while we are, talking from outside. We need access to Gaza to really see and witness and document and evaluate the level of destruction. There had been a lot of UN reports which had estimated, billions of dollars. Yet we can imagine that the level of destruction and devastation is beyond our consciousness. let alone, of course, the mental health issues now in Gaza. People need support on different levels. People need humanitarian aid. They need food. They need medicine. They need medical services. They need water. They need fuel. They need homes. They need shelters. They need education. And they need safety and protection. But also, people need, to get over their traumas, because what the Palestinian civilian has suffered is not okay for humanity to tolerate any longer.
Israeli street protests demanding a hostage deal are growing. Could domestic pressure inside of Israel tip the balance towards a negotiated exit? And how should Palestinians read this moment?
Listen, I mean, let's be very, very clear. The Israeli public wants the release of the hostages, and that is their right. They have every right, according to the International for Geneva Conventions. The hostages must be released. Yet the focus in the public opinion of the Israelis is only on the hostages release. I really don't see slogans in the demonstrations and the protests talking about ending the Israeli military occupation, talking about granting the Palestinians the right to self-determination, talking about ceasefire for the civilians in Gaza, talking about letting in humanitarian aid for the children of Gaza, or allowing medical services for the children who had lost their organs or are amputated in Gaza. So the Israeli street is putting a lot of pressure, I hope, but they have not succeeded in the past 21 months. They have been calling, they have been contacting the White House, from Biden to Trump. Yet, their pressure is very important, and it is, augmenting and increasing. Yet it did not really pay the fruits. It did not really, bear the fruits it should have demonstrated a while ago. I really hope that the Palestinian public and the Israeli public get to a level of sanity where we all demand immediate ceasefire right now, release of hostages, withdrawal of the Israeli military system and military authorities from Gaza, protection and safety to the Palestinian people, immediate and unconditional humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people, the granting of the Palestinian right to self-determination, in statehood, in sovereignty, in dignity, and in defined borders. The Israeli military occupation must end. If we're serious about conflict resolution and peace and diplomacy, then the first thing is tackling the root cause of all those atrocities and sufferings that we are witnessing, which is basically by starting with ending the Israeli military occupation, with defining the border of the state of Israel, and with recognizing the state of Palestine, and with providing protection and peacekeeping missions with evaluation and monitoring mechanisms by the international community that have a legal and moral obligation today under international law.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal Iriqat, for sharing your insights at a time when questions about aid, accountability, and the future of Gaza could not be more urgent. With this, it is a wrap on Focal Length. Stay tuned for more news updates.